Hello, we're live. Okay. Hello. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Testers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for many reasons. But it is just an hour a week that we set aside to have like an open conversation with everybody who's here. And today we have another person here joining me. Lindsay has been on with us before. Uh, Lindsay, you want to just say hello?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Brandon, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
Um,
of course. Thanks for being here. Um,
yes.
just like a brief reminder of your like biographical information. Uh, Lindsay, well, maybe it's better for you to introduce yourself, but Lindsay runs a company called Amygdalico. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. So, Amygdalico, what our clinicians do is provide parent child interaction therapy to families who have kids ages 2 through 8 who suffer from externalizing behaviors, so anxiety, depression, etc., and their parents or caregivers. So, our clinicians are based throughout Missouri and Illinois, and spread PCAT to families who want it and need it. Yeah.
Great. Uh, so we, as always, on this, we have a topic that we'll start with and just kind of conversing. But the ultimate goal is for whoever's here in chat. Anyone who's here watching, we appreciate you and we're glad you're here, but we don't know what you're thinking about. But if you guys are in the chat, anybody who is asks questions, responds to things, you're part of the conversation too, and that shapes what we're talking about and shifts us in different directions. So please feel free to throw anything out at any point, even if you feel like it's not related to what we're talking about, because we'd be happy to know. Nah, no worries. It's a big dog. It sounds like, huh? Um, so yeah, so we'll start by just chatting, but really, please feel free to jump in. We I I love it when people in chat are talking. It's way more fun to feel like there's other people on the other end than just the two of us. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, and what kind of dog is it?
I have two dogs. I have a lab boxer mix and a pit bull.
Oh,
Yes. And they
cool.
are both very sweet and cuddly. And I also have a cat. And so the pit bull frequently plays with the cat. They'll like run up and down and the hall and pounce. It's adorable.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes.
Growing up, I had a dog and a cat that were like best friends too. It's delightful. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, so you and I, Lindsay, had exchanged a couple emails, and you'd thrown out some things that you thought might be worth talking about. I don't know of those which one is most on your mind, or if anything else is. But what do you think? Where should we start today?
Well, oh, I think real life is what is the best way. Like what out of the things that I said, what stuck out to you the most? Like with regards to what
Let's
you
see.
have going on.
I mean, I've been doing a lot of like way more business focused things lately than I want to in terms of like running my own business. I like doing, consulting and helping people, but I've been one of the things you mentioned on your list was like entrepreneurship in the mental health kind of space, I guess, field. So that's on my mind a lot because I've just been having to do quite a bit of the like administrative and business oriented tasks that I don't particularly enjoy lately. Um, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds great. Like so I think that's so important, like coming from a provider and then trying to figure out the business aspect of it and merging it. So like what are some I'm curious to like what are some problems that you ran into or how are you?
Yeah, well, so a lot of the things I'm dealing with lately are just like, technical issues and things where something I thought worked a particular way and it turns out not to have, and I need to correct it, that kind of thing. But as a more general thing about, you're going to have to help me today, Liz. I know you and I have talked many times at this point, but I always give my caveat that I go like, my tendency is to be very philosophical and abstract and
Yes.
pull me out of that. I think generally, like in an abstract way, the process of being helpful to an individual or a couple or a family or a group or whatever it is that you're doing, I think that there are certain elements of that that are kind of fundamentally at odds with entrepreneurship or business or, not that it's incompatible or unmanageable, but that you have to have a certain approach to interacting with people in order to be helpful to them. And some things about that approach don't translate across one-to-one super well in the business sense. Is that too vague? I could be more specific.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, go a little more specific.
So, for example, like unconditional positive regard, right, is something that we talk about in therapy all the time. The idea that in order for, and for those of you who don't know, this is a Carl Rogers, who was like the founder of humanistic therapy or person-centered, client-centered therapy, different ways of calling it. He developed a list that he called the necessary and sufficient elements of therapeutic change, I think, therapeutic environment. And unconditional positive regard was one of those things. It is necessary, according to that way of thinking, in order to be helpful. And it means that no matter what you do, no matter what you say as the client, that I will regard you positively as your therapist or coach or whatever the relationship is, if we're looking at it through this. Which doesn't mean, I think, well, actually, I'm curious about your interpretation of it, but I think it means I'll be there, right? That it doesn't mean that I will approve of every single thing that you do or say, that there's nothing that would maybe make me feel or think like, oh, that's not so great, or let's challenge that. Because how can I be helpful in that sense? But it does mean that whatever you do or say, I'm just going to ask more questions until I understand it better, as opposed to saying like, okay, well, I'm writing you off a little bit now because of that thing, right? So that unconditional positive regard, that promise of, hey, I'm going to be here, when you're coupling that with a real and a necessary thing of money and payment and that kind of thing, which is not like optional in most cases. I'm sure there are independently wealthy therapists and things out there. There's like an inherent friction between those two things, right? Does that make sense what I'm saying? I don't know. This is a big, like, philosophical, like, underpinning problem, not like a specific, how do we run our businesses or that kind of thing.
This is great. I'm glad, I love to go big, Brandon. Yeah. So what I heard was, as therapists, the job is to, in your words, be there and promote understanding, and it doesn't and not have judgment. So it's not the therapist's job to judge whether something's right or wrong. It's just to get the person to where they want to get to. And so, and then, so I don't know if I'm going to make this connection correctly, Brandon, so please correct me. But in the business world, things just seem so cutthroat, and it's hard to have the same.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the business world is very competitive, right? Generally speaking. And that kind of, it's not that a person can't have both competitive aspects and also helpful and, long-term empathetic, whatever kind of aspects, because obviously we can and we do, and people manage it. But it is navigating that balance between the two things, right? That the way of approaching how you work in the room and how you support both your clients, but also, like, in both our cases, we have other clinicians that we train and supervise. How do we support them too, while also within the structure of like a business? I'm avoiding saying capitalistic, structure where there are laws and processes and realities to how we have to do it.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. As we grow our business, it's important to implement things that are really helpful for humans, for us, for our health, to reduce anxiety and increase happiness. So, for example, like implementing meditation teachings or the benefits of meditation, and then offering, something, a class or a group meditation or something like that, right? Just to meditation could be any mindfulness or activity or something, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily meditation. But as business owners, I think, we're the new generation, and it's our job to make these important changes to increase the health of individuals, such as working from home, right?
Sure. Yeah, remote work is an important part of it. I think even things like compensation structures, and there's industry specific things, and there's things that I have identified to try and do differently. And it's, I guess, to me, that most, this is probably a very inaccurate statement, but it's helpful for me for me to say right now. It seems as though in most industries, the the philosophy, the approach of the people engaged in that work, business wise, doesn't seem quite as impactful as an industry like this, where we're directly interfacing with clients. We have a large impact. Like, that's the entire point of what it is that we're doing, is to be able to have that impact. And so whatever philosophical approach we're taking, or how we approach those things, it matters. It matters a lot. And of course, there are people who approach this more from like industry agnostic, I suppose, that they run therapeutic or other, you know, mental health or whatever helping profession businesses as though it's a business of any kind. Um, and I'm not making a comment on how people do it or don't do it, but for me, that's difficult. My philosophical approach to this work is about collaboration and community and sharing and support, and not making demands, or making room for people to respond to those demands in whatever way works for them, or even if it doesn't work, whatever way they respond, right?
Yeah. And how are you doing that? How do you do that?
That's a good question. I'm going to check real quick because I see a
Oh, yeah,
question
yeah.
like that. What advice do you have for parents who you see trying to fix their kids, or for those kids to deal with those parents? Did I write parents who push to understand the quote unquote problem? I should have done this, so they can fix it, rather than working with their kids together and trying to understand the kid, or parents who are caught up in their own perspective. That's a good question. And now I've already forgotten the question. Oh, how do I do that? How do I balance that? I'm not sure that I do so well, but my best tactic for doing that is to separate those roles out, right? That we don't have therapists handling invoicing and billing with their own clients, so that we can keep that separate from the therapeutic relationship. Or one thing that I do that is very unusual in this industry, typically in group practices, the individual practitioners get paid some split, right, of whatever the client fees are, and that usually is paid to the practitioners after the organization, the group, collects. Mm-hmm. We don't do it that way, because I don't want therapists or coaches, for that matter, to have to be thinking about, okay, I'm trying to support this person, but they haven't paid their invoice yet, and I haven't gotten paid yet. We pay them right up front, so that any stress around invoice payments and things like that are handled on the business end of things, and don't interfere with all that.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Brandon. It sounds like, we have therapists and people have bills to pay. And so keeping things on schedule and already having the money up front to get people paid sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what about this question? Because of course, I like the question. I have responses, but you primarily focus on working with, that's like you said, it's kids 2 to 8 and their parents. So that's your whole everything. So what do you think? What's your response to that question of, what do you do with parents that you see who are trying to fix their kids, just want to solve the problem and be done with it?
Yeah. Can you read the whole thing again for me?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to post it up. There you go. So that you can read it. I'll read it aloud just for anybody who struggles with reading. But what advice do you have for parents who you see trying to quote unquote fix their kids, or for those kids to deal with those parents? To elaborate, parents who push to understand the quote unquote problem so they can quote unquote fix it, rather than working with their kids together and trying to understand the kid. I think I'll say some stuff,
please,
that sparks something. But honestly, like, this is a particular dynamic we see a lot in parents and kids, parent-child relationships, especially in therapy, when parents are the ones who are almost always initiating the process, right? Certainly the ones paying for it and have a stake in it and that kind of thing. But it's not unique to that relationship. It really is this bigger concept of that we can identify and separate all of these things into like discrete, completable tasks. that you can do something and be done with it, or that you can identify clearly, this is the problem, and when this thing changes in this particular way, there will no longer be any more problem, which isn't how it works. So this wanting to like fix their kids is problematic, not just from the kid's perspective. I hope that's obvious that it's problematic from their perspective, but also from the parent's perspective, and of course from the practitioner's perspective, that if we enter into it with this mistaken idea that we can easily and clearly and like, what's the word I'm looking for? Non-arbitrarily define what the problem is, and then set goal conditions and kind of, make whatever changes to get to those goal conditions, and hey, voila, problem's done. It doesn't, that can't happen, right? So if we, all three people in that, the child, the parent, and the practitioner, if they're all entering in with that understanding, everybody's going to be stressed and upset as things go along.
Yes, this is true. So do you mind if I happen here?
Yeah, please.
Yep. So something that this question makes me think about is, let's say we're in a relationship, or we can put our child back into it, and we see them doing something that maybe is unhealthy, and we know that they don't want to do it we know that they want to change their behavior because they've expressed this, in some shape or fashion. And so it's easy to say, okay, don't do this, don't do that. These are the reasons why it's really harmful. It will kill us, or we're arguing all the time, et cetera, et cetera. But we all know like the behaviors that we shouldn't do. One of the best ways to change somebody else's behavior is to model that behavior. So if like our kiddo is shouting all the time, asking for things and shouting, then us becoming aware of that and becoming aware when we shout, and then keeping our voices calm and responding to them in a calm manner, even if they shout. And to our partner, like even if there's an argument happening, or, we're both frustrated and the kiddo's there, staying, like keeping calm. So whatever the behavior that we want our child to change, we start to work on that behavior. Even if we don't exhibit it, even just extra correction. So because our children also learn from us, right? They model our behaviors as well. So
Sure.
I would recommend modeling the behavior that we want to see.
Yeah, and I think that from what I know of parent-child interaction therapy, because we've talked about it some, although I don't have like a very deep understanding of it, it seems as though the structure of it itself kind of prevents this problem to some extent. That the whole point is that the parents and the kid are there together the entire time, right?
That's right. The parents and children work together, and the parent is learning how to model new behaviors in real time. So the parent has a Bluetooth in their ear, and the therapist is talking to the parent live and helping them out in that situation. So that way the child sees new behaviors coming from the parent. And essentially the parent is becoming the new therapist, right?
Right. So even if they come in with an idea that they want their kid fixed, to whatever extent they're enabled to, do that, it's through their own development, right? That the focus is on what they can do differently, which gives them a real-time observation, moment to moment of, oh, hey, you know what? Whatever the thing is that I'm identifying as the problem, it still shifts moment to moment, and it's different based on what I'm doing, at least as one variable in all the things that weigh into it. So I can't identify it as some like external static thing that, some monster attached to my child's brain, that it becomes very clear, I would imagine very quickly, that all behavior arises out of interaction between the individual and the context that they're in. So you can't just locate it inside the kid and say there's something wrong with them that we got to change.
Yeah.
I'm making a lot of guesses because I
Sure.
based on the little I know about that process.
Yeah, we do learn from our environment, absolutely. Whether it's from our parents or our school or wherever every single situation. So the best, like if our parents model the behavior that they want us to exhibit, then we're more likely to do that behavior, And so then what the parents can model for us is, let's say the child is upset and the parents model staying calm or like using deep breaths or something like that to calm down, then whenever the child's out in public, they can start to do that too. So because we can't control, the external world, what they say to us, right? We can just
Right.
control how we respond.
Yeah. Well, and even that, I mean, I know you and I have talked about this before, but I would say even that, even our response to what the outside world does, we don't have perfect control. Sometimes we're more in control, in other contexts we're less in control.
Yes.
But emotion in particular is not something we choose to experience. Once we experience it, how we react to it can dictate, whether we stay in it or it gets worse or better or whatever. But as far as it kind of first arriving, can't control that first reaction to something.
Yeah, it definitely takes practice, especially if it's not something that we're used to doing. If we're used to getting angry at a situation, it's going to, how do we learn not to get angry or learn the new behaviors? So, yes, becoming who we want takes practice.
Yeah. And as far as like structurally on my end, because we don't do parent-child interaction therapy, we do more traditional individual talk therapy. Typically, we do some family and couple and groups, but mostly individual. A couple structural things that I put into place, and not that it's unique to us, many people do it this way, right? Number one, that we have confidentiality for the children no matter what age they are, right? So there are different legal requirements in different states. In Illinois, at age 12 is when legally there's, legal privilege, meaning like legal confidentiality for a client from even their own parents. And I don't work with kids younger than that age, but if I did, I would probably try and keep the same thing going, because it's really difficult when parents, well, I guess it's connected to number two. Number two is nobody changes, like we were just talking about, independent of their context. So if we were to take a puzzle and pull one piece out of the puzzle and reshape it to be some other thing that we think is better, as soon as we try and put it back into the puzzle, it either doesn't fit now or it's going to snap back into its original shape, right? That if an individual who lives with parents and siblings and whatever goes and works on making changes and then goes back to the home and everything else is the same, in AA, they have a saying, right? If nothing changes, then nothing changes. So for us, we consider with all like minor clients that parents are part of the process. But you combine those two things, right? Parents are part of the process. They must be, but also that doesn't mean that they get to have any access to any information about what's happening in their child's therapy sessions, including even that sometimes they'll be like, well, I just want to know, did they mention this thing? Can't say. What did you guys talk about? Can't say. Do you know what you're going to talk about next time? No. And different people do it differently. I'm going to say that because a lot of people aren't looking for this way of doing it, and not every therapist does it this way. But I think that's important for the kid to have their room to explore and grow independent of the parent, but for the parent to also be a part of the process.
Yeah. Kids are beings too, and kids have emotions and feelings and also need space to process and think. So that makes sense, what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, and it can help the relationship too, to be able to, in a sense, be a buffer sometimes. Like you're mentioning, sometimes the parents and the children have been arguing over something for so long, when we can just say, okay, don't worry about that anymore. That's now on the child and their therapist to work through together, including even like a good, I think, kind of parallel for this, an analog for this is school grades, right? That over the last couple decades, especially, students and their parents have gotten a lot more access to be able to check on grades, like in moment to moment real time.
Yes.
There's benefits to that, but there's also like, well, if you're capable of checking your child's grades every single night, then do you feel obligated all of a sudden to check their grades every single night? And if there's a 0 on something, do you feel obligated to go handle it now? And does that go well? And so on and so forth. That sometimes having that information, like, be like, no, that's between them and the teacher, can help the relationship, right?
Yeah, it sounds like there's a need for boundaries, like knowing how much, like for parents to know how much space to give the kids, and then how much to jump in, right?
Yeah. So there's a comment here saying you can't be comfortable and upfront when someone who controls your food and shelter and entire home life is listening over your shoulder. And I think obviously there's truth to that, especially in abusive or even, borderline or debatably abusive cases or whatever, where some people would disagree. That yeah, I mean, if it's a matter of fear and safety, obviously that nobody can be free to explore anything within that context. Now, if it's not about safety or fear, I think this same concern is still true, but I would just reframe it a little bit as there's a reason that we have an ethical prescription, right? Like a rule that there's no, we don't engage in dual relationships in therapy. That the only relationship we have with you is therapist client. You're not also my friend outside of here, or I don't also like go to your store and buy things from you or whatever. Because regardless of whether you're worried about someone harming you, if someone is a good friend of mine, I know we're going to interact again in the future, then part of my mind has to be aware at all times of how might whatever I do or say impact the way that they perceive me, right? Even if it's not like I think they're going to hurt me, I might not want them to know that I struggle with this thing, even though I think they'll be nice about it or whatever. Parents are complicated relationships. There's so many different hats, different roles that both the parent and the child have to play for the other person. So yeah, when we add on more things into that, it's like it gets real tricky real fast. So to isolate that out to, again, like we're talking about, unconditional positive regard, no matter what you tell me or whatever you do or whatever you say, it's not going to affect the way that I interact with you in terms of thinking of you as like higher quality or lower quality or anything like that, right?
I wish we did that across humanity. Like everybody who came across, we held them in that regard.
Yeah, I do too. And of course, it's not like it's a theoretical thing. It's not actually possible for every individual we ever meet to be like, okay, let's go more in depth and in detail. Sometimes we got to move along. Power structures are complicated. It's hard to keep things level with too many variables. Yeah. And that's, I think there's a way to acknowledge that and understand that there is a power differential in parenting, obviously, by design, and that there should be, like my 4-month-old should not have the ability to do whatever he wants to do. I mean, he's 4 months old. He's not like crawling around yet, but if my 2-year-old wants to lick the toilet, I'm going to say no. And I have more power in the relationship and the ability to do that. But yeah, power is not in and of itself inherently bad, but it's tricky, especially because I think this is true of education as well and therapy, but parenting for sure, that everybody feels as though like because they have parents or they've been in school, they either are an expert in it or should be an expert in it. And if they don't know what to do, they feel as though like that's shameful, right? Like you're a parent, right, Lindsay?
That's right. Yes.
And that parenting shame, that experience of like, oh, am I doing something wrong? Like my kid's doing something. What would the other parents around me right now think I should do in response to what my kid is doing? Whether you let it impact you or not, it's a thing that you think about.
Yeah, definitely. So my situation, I had a kiddo young when I was 19. And so in order to go back to college, my aunt and uncle offered to help me raise him. So I essentially became the parent that went out on the weekends because I was in school. So that was really hard, right? Like the psychological, of having somebody else raise your kid. Am I doing this right? Like, am I being selfish because I'm going to school, even though it's for him, but like, and us. And so absolutely. And so something that I really did was just have to accept my situation. Like it is what it was. I was going to school to better us. And I had to just, if there was judgment, essentially just let it go and just kept going.
To whatever extent you're able. And obviously it's not always possible to let it go completely. Even someone like you, Lindsay, who is brilliant and educated and has expertise in related fields and whatever, that still sticks with you, that intrinsic like human process of looking around at what other people do. And if it's different than what you're doing, wondering if what you're doing is bad, right? Even if it's not, or have reason to believe it's not or whatever. And it gets particularly tricky with kids because our whole job as adults, whether we're parents or therapists or teachers, whatever, the whole point of the structure is we have limited time where we are able to influence this person's context, right? That while my kids live in my house, I have a lot of influence and impact over the things that they're exposed to and what they're asked to do and whatever, not necessarily how they react to those things. But then we are intrinsically in a position where we're making guesses constantly about, okay, later on, will they be better off or worse off if I do this thing now or this thing now, right? So we're constantly questioning ourselves and racking our brains for, okay, did that just, is this a bad thing? Is this a good thing that I did? And we'll never know. And it's a really terrible position to be in. But there's really, I don't think, a way to avoid that. And it's not unique to parenting. It's just a particularly like intense version of it. I think that struggle of, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? And whenever other people around you are doing it different, you're going to worry that you might be doing it wrong somehow.
Yeah, I think that is a big problem. And one of the best things it seems to do is to figure out how to essentially gain acceptance of the moment and to not have, to accept decisions, right? And to not have, How do people get rid of the doubt, fear, and worry, right? Because we don't know, right? Because there's a million, but there's usually we're like, okay, between this decision and this decision, will I mess up? However, there's a million other decisions that could be made there too. And so
Right.
we don't take that into consideration, at least not consciously. And so at that moment, whatever decision we make, accepting it and then moving forward and figuring out how to do that, how, an individual can get rid of the worry and the doubt and the fear behind.
Yeah, a lot of people, especially who call themselves psychoanalysts, really emphasize this, learning to be comfortable with the not knowing, right? That we don't have perfect knowledge or information about what's going to happen next if I do this or that or whatever other thing I'm not even considering. And yet time is going to pass anyway. So we got to do something. And that is uncomfortable. And I think I like what you're saying, that being able to acknowledge the reality of, yeah, I'm going to feel this way. Like, for example, I personally, just generally, right, I don't like being angry. I don't enjoy the feeling of it. I don't think most people do. But I also don't I don't philosophically believe that my anger at somebody else is useful, right? Not that it's never appropriate. But that's the thing. It happens. I'm going to be angry sometimes. So now in Buddhism, there's a concept they refer to as the second arrow, which is how you feel about how you feel. So first something happens and you get sad. Then you become sad because of the fact that you got sad. Oh man, I'm a person who got sad at that thing. That makes me sad. So if I do get angry, yeah, I can be angry about the fact that I got angry. Damn it, I failed again. I should never be angry. Or I can acknowledge, like, yeah, I got angry. It happened. I don't like it. I wouldn't have chosen it to be that way. And I want to be careful about what I do in that moment. But judging myself for responding in that way. And then when you can do that work for yourself, it's a lot easier to do that work for whether it's your kids or your friends or your spouse or whomever else.
That's right. That leading by example. Absolutely. Yeah. So with anger, it's so, easy to hold our, something happened to us, maybe that we really, really don't like, and holding whatever anger against the other person or thing. The problem with that is it doesn't really hurt the other individual. It just really hurts us psychologically. Then we just keep ruminating on it, right? And can't, and can't get to positive thoughts or positive things, and then we start to, some of us start to taking it physically, right? Maybe we'll stay in bed or et cetera, and just, so being angry, I think it's important to develop skills on how to reduce that.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
there's that old quote, and I don't remember who it's from, but that being angry at somebody is like taking poison and hoping they die.
Yes, that's
But
right.
I will say, especially in the context of a conversation about parents and kids, that no, like your anger can harm another person too, or at least your anger can affect you in ways that you respond to by doing things that are harmful to another person. So there are definitely, I agree with you, many, many times where my anger doesn't hurt them, but it does hurt me. But there are also times I want to be aware of the context that no, my anger, even the fact of it, the presence of it, even if I don't do anything with it, is going to be potentially harmful to somebody else.
That's right, because we carry it with us. And if the situation comes up again, so something around it, maybe we get a reminder of the situation, then we become angry again or sad, right? And so then we go out for coffee, and then maybe we're a little bit more mean or not as friendly to the barista or whatever, thinking about these events that carry forward. Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to go back to, there was a question earlier that we kind of passed over. Is there something we've noticed is particularly helpful in starting real constructive dialogue between parents and children? Because I think that's a good question. And it's one of the kinds of questions I ask for all the time that's more specific and helps me be more specific. So I'll say, of course, it's caveats, right? Like there's different things in different scenarios, and a 2-year-old and a 15-year-old are different scenarios and blah, blah, blah. Having said that, I think for me, and I'm always going to go back to this generally, it's about language development. Now, more specifically, developing language in this, I often will but early on say something like to the effect of, I keep having this feeling in my gut and it's really uncomfortable, like painful. It gets worse over time. And I tell other people about it and they tell me it's called hunger, and that in order to resolve it, I just need to eat food. So I go eat food, and it helps, it goes away, but then it comes back. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong, because everyone tells me it's hunger. They tell me to eat food. I do. And it doesn't work. It only works for a minute, So what do I do? And don't tell me to eat food, because I tried that and it didn't work. Right? That some of these things are not about like, here's a problem, you solve it and it's done forever, but rather just maintenance. You solve it until it becomes a problem again in whatever new variable way it is now a problem again, and you solve it again over and over and over. And that's not detrimental or bad. That's just life. That's what it means to be a person and exist.
So with this question, I would ask, what does this person mean by real constructive dialogue?
Yeah, if you're there in the chat, there's a bit of a delay. Lindsay just said that so if they respond, it might take a second for them to get back. I think that's a good question. I love those questions of, what does this mean to you exactly, right? Like, it's not that I'm not aware of what constructive means generally, but I don't know what context you're coming from, so I want more information. Mm-hmm. Which, that in and of itself is one of the things that can be very helpful for people who are struggling in their relationships, parent-child relationships or otherwise, that the idea of, things that they don't know, and they know things that you don't know. It doesn't matter if they're 2 years old or whatever. They know things that you don't know. They live a life that you are not able to observe their particular perception of every moment of their day. So we got to communicate about these things with each other, and that the best expert on any person's life is that person themselves, including 2-year-olds. So other experts that give you parenting advice is great. All that stuff is helpful. And at the end of the day, you have the person in your life that you have, right? The kid, the parent, the spouse, the whatever. And if general expertise advice helps, cool. And if it doesn't, then who cares whether it should or should not? It just didn't. So you got to move on to the next thing, rather than being angry at the other person for, hey, I did this thing and it's supposed to work.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's with anything in life. If something doesn't work, try something else. And then maybe 2 things will work together, or maybe if we modify a bit. Being open to experiences and trying new things, and being our own scientist, or collecting our own data, to figure out what works for us and our family, I think is very important.
Yeah, that iterative process. And especially, again, on the parenting side of this, because parents are bombarded with information constantly about, you need to make sure your kid does this and you need to make sure they don't do that, without a lot of information or explanation or allowance for the variability from one child to the next. So there's kind of this like hypothetical idealized child or childhood that each parent kind of constructs in response to all of those messages. And then the further off your kid is from that, the worse you feel, as opposed to, so there's clarification there for you.
Cool. Thank you.
In
Thank you for
negotiation terms, talking about the interests rather than positions. But yeah, I think that approach, not that I'm a negotiation expert but to what I understand, from what I understand of those terms, that what we need to negotiate is not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it, what we're aiming for, what thing adds into what other thing. So a specific like framework that I give people all the time, exercise I give people all the time, especially parent children, is you can ask once, then you got to ask why. Meaning I'm allowed to ask myself or anybody else to do anything without any understanding of why I'm asking them to do it. I can say to myself, come on, Brandon, you got to like run 7 miles today. And I don't need to know why I'm asking myself that. I can ask my kid, hey, I need you to get down from there, without explaining it. But if the response to that initial question is anything other than following through on what was asked, right? If I do anything other than run 7 miles today, then before I ask again, before I try to increase the pressure and say, hey, come on now, you really got to do it. First, I have to ask myself, why is it that I'm asking for this? I got to be sure that I actually have a reason here beyond just repetition of things I've observed, if that makes sense. So if I say to a kid, hey, get down from there, and they get down right away, cool. And if they don't, if they ask why or don't listen or whatever, then I got to check with myself real quick and say, do I know why? Yes, I know why, because it's not safe. Like this is a safety thing. But there are other times where it's like, no, actually, I'm not sure why I think they shouldn't be up there. It's not unsafe. They're not breaking anything. It just is unusual. So maybe I don't need to ask. And it's not always about talking yourself out of the position. It's oftentimes just about being able to help, especially in parenting, help the children understand this is what I care about. I don't care about whether you're up there or not. I care about whether you are hurt or not. And I think that you being up there makes it more likely that you're going to get hurt. And I don't want that. So let's get down.
Okay, so Brandon, where my thoughts went with these two questions, I'm sorry, I'm the person who said this if I go somewhere totally different. So to me, the question was how to increase communication between the parent and child.
I'll put it back up for you.
And in terms of negotiation.
Starting real constructive dialogue.
Okay, yeah. So based on that, and then your explanation, which thank you, that helps. So something that I would do is I would learn to listen, become a really good listener. So if somebody is talking to me and I don't agree with them, then I think about the word or acronym WAIT. So this is, I got this from Chris Voss's negotiation group, actually. And it stands for, why am I talking? And so that just reminds me to listen, to keep listening. And then when I'm speaking or when I'm listening to my child or somebody else, so I'll do that and then just reflect what they said. So if I want more information, I listen and then I repeat essentially what they're saying, maybe in different words, to make sure I have an understanding. And then that usually makes them want to tell me more. So in order to increase the communication, I would become a great listener. And then reflect, like the last couple words that they say out of a sentence.
Yeah, I think that's great. And just to like build on that, because this is something I do in family therapy all the time, that part of being a good listener is about like actually detecting the physical stimuli of the words and sounds that you're making in your like verbal or your nonverbal communication, meta communication. And then another part of it is about how I interpret those signals, right? So when we're talking about becoming a good listener, a lot of the time people interpret that as like, okay, understand what they mean all the time. Well, how do I do that? But you were very clear and specific. No, it's sometimes just about repeat back the last few words that they said. So an exercise that I do very similar to that is when I'm doing family therapy or group therapy, I will sometimes, I define what I mean for the group when I say I want somebody to hear that. And it means literally to say back to the other person verbatim, word for word, to the best of your ability, everything that they just said. No interpretation, no response. That stuff can come later. But first, literally just saying back to them their own words, which is terrible. No one likes doing it because you can't do it perfectly, generally speaking. And it brings focus to you as a speaker as well. Like what you and I are doing, this format and this pattern of speech is I'm talking for a good chunk and you're talking for a good chunk, because this format is lends itself to that. But in conversation, it becomes very clear to people very quickly, like, oh, they can only hear like the first sentence I'm saying. So when I then go on for another 8 minutes and then I get so mad that they missed something, it's like, no, we got to talk in shorter bursts back and forth, responding to one another. But rather than prescribe that and say, talk in shorter bursts, we just say, hear each other. And so you get a real like sense of you in reality and them in reality. How much are they hearing? How much am I hearing? Before we even look at the interpretation and the response part of things.
Yes, that's a great example and a great activity. And in addition to how much is each individual hearing, that also what they're also doing is mimicry, right? So one person hears something, then they get to say it back, and then we get to hear it in a different way or in a different tone or a different inflection, right? And so then we can model that or get a better clarity of the situation. So that's a great activity.
Yeah. Feeling heard in that way can be very beneficial too, even if it's also sometimes stressful because you're realizing that you talk a lot more. I would say that generally when there's relationship problems, right, that we can divide that up into different categories, and these are arbitrary, but they're useful. And a lot of it falls under what we would call communication issues, that like it's simply about you don't understand what I'm trying to say, or I don't understand what you're trying to say. But in reality, if we were communicating more effectively, it turns out that the conflict actually doesn't exist. There are other times where conflict is substantial, like there's meaningful, substantive differences that we might understand each other perfectly, but we have positions that are different. But we can't even discover whether that's the case until we are able to communicate well enough to make sure that it's not a communication issue. And there's other problems too, where it's like structural issues that have nothing to do with whether or not you and I are in a different place. It's just you and I are both stuck in something really crappy and it sucks. And I don't want it to be the case and you don't want it to be the case. But I have a human tendency to just get mad at you sometimes and you get mad at me sometimes, even though neither one of us created this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you suggest people do, like, to get out of it and to start communicating more? And
yeah, well, so I have like a framework that I call faultless miscommunication, and then some specific exercises like a couple that we just mentioned. But the point is, I always feel so self-conscious when I start talking about my weird way of defining words that I just have to do to navigate life. To me, because some people will say all behavior is communication, which I get what that means. It means that you can get information about a person based on anything that they do. But I don't find it very useful, because why wouldn't we just call it behavior then? To me, I think communication, I define it as anything that I do with the intent, the purpose of impacting your experience, changing something about what you're thinking, what you're feeling, or what you're doing. And that doesn't mean it's manipulative or controlling. It's just, that's how I am a part of your context, right? So if I say, hey, good to see you, that doesn't mean I'm trying to manipulate you. I might just be trying to call your attention to me, right? So when we establish it that way, a couple things. Of anything I say, any communication, what I'm really going for is an impact on you. So I'm watching you, observing, perceiving you, so I can check and see, is what I'm doing working? And we work backwards from there. Everything I do and say is my best idea of how to create that impact for you, the impact that I want. And some of that is going to be stuff that I'm intentionally choosing, and some of it is not. I am not choosing my accent or, the specific tone of my voice. I'm not thinking about that intentionally. Honestly, for the most part, we don't even really intentionally choose our words. It would be way too difficult. So I think it's helpful. This faultless miscommunication thing it's a 4-step process. Any particular instance of communication. First, there's my intent, what impact I'm trying to have on you. Then there's my behavior, which is whatever I do or say observably in order to try and have that impact. Then there's your observation, which is not going to be the same thing. You're not going to notice every single piece of my communication, and you're going to notice things about what I'm doing and saying that I didn't intend to be part of the communication, but you're interpreting as part of the communication. And then fourth is how you unpack that. It's your interpretation of what you noticed. So number 1 and number 4, my intention and your interpretation will never be the same thing. They can't be. It's literally impossible. Even if I just am saying the word fire, you and I have different experiences and connotations and understandings. Even if I get real specific and say, I'm talking about a candle that's on fire, like the wick of a candle that's on fire, and it's that particular candle that you and I both know, we're still not going to be thinking of exactly, it's not connected to the same things, right? So the point of communication is not that you and I understand exactly the same. It's that you and I are close enough that it doesn't cause us any problems. So we get as close as we think we need to, and then move forward. And it's only when a problem comes up that we realize, oh, we weren't actually as close as we thought, or we needed to be closer than we've discovered we are. And the important part is, it's not my fault as the speaker. I didn't misspeak, because my interpretation of what I did is a valid one. Somebody else besides you might have interpreted it the way that I intended it. And it's not your fault as the person receiving the communication. You didn't misunderstand or misinterpret it, because your interpretation is a valid one, but they're different. So if we can approach it, instead of having to be like, no, I said this and you're reading, whatever, or no, you're just being angry and blaming me for it. No, as, okay, let's double check, because sometimes I'll teach people to say, okay, what did you hear me say? Or it seems to me as though you're responding to something that I didn't intend to say. So let me check, because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you heard me right and this is the response, but it's different than I expected, right? Hello in the chat. Yes, you can ask questions. We only have 8 minutes or so. Sorry, go ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah, Brandon, you're so right. Like, every single one of us experience the world differently. Even in the same situation, we experience the world differently. And we know that through research, right? And the fun example of the kids playing basketball and the gorilla, right? Yeah. So I think this is, an interesting topic to learn more about just as an individual, because that'll help us whenever we're having these arguments to be a little more understanding, right? And maybe the other person hasn't thought about the situation in this way, that we all have different experiences, and maybe we are talking about the same thing, and this argument, is not actually about what we think it's about, etc. So if we learn to if we learn that all of us have different experiences, we can try to use that to have better interactions with others, to be more understanding, to not get so upset. Yeah.
And I do like the invisible gorilla, and a lot of different like perception things. And I'll just, I've done this a million times on here and everybody's heard, but I like to use the real-time example of, until I say what I'm about to say 5 seconds from now, you're not currently aware of the feeling of the chair underneath your body or floor or whatever. And as soon as I said that, you became aware. So we can demonstrate in real time in a way that people can't argue with, because they just experienced it. No, you don't notice everything. You can't. That's not how the brain works. So the idea that of all the things you could potentially notice, you're noticing the exact same things as somebody else and they're noticing the exact same thing. No, that would only really be possible if each of you was noticing everything, which you're not.
Yeah, we don't have those capabilities right now to notice everything. That sounds like attention, right? We have to be able to pay attention and extreme attention.
Yeah. Attention. I mean, I like to talk about it in terms of wide versus deep. And this kind of, we just got another question that this goes in with. I have multiple interests. How do I pursue them all without compromising any of them? Which, I wish there was an answer to that. But resources are finite, including attention. Anything that you're paying attention to, you're spending resources on that cannot be spent on something else now, right? So wide versus deep attention for me is, I find it useful to act, to think and behave as though attention is static. The amount of attention that I am paying doesn't change. Where that attention goes, am I noticing 100 things shallowly or one thing in a lot of depth and detail? That matters. But yeah, there's no magic solution to, okay, how do I stop doing, interest X so that I can do interest Y for some time without losing any benefit I would have gotten by spending that time on interest X instead. But that, sorry, go ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah, can you pop the question up one more time? Thank you. Yeah. So for me, this is about integration. So how can we use all of our interests to, find that one thing that we're interested in? So even though, my background is in research, I'm also interested in like quantum physics, right? So how does that relate, right? And so without compromising, I'd have to know what that means, I guess.
Right, because even if we're talking about integration, then what we mean is I'm doing something which involves some element of X and some element of Y, but it can't be completely X, like theoretically just doing X could be. And I think that is the right question. Compromising, what does that mean? Because oftentimes, and feel free to answer, but we only have a few minutes left. Oftentimes when somebody's using a word like that, what they mean is they're talking about an outcome that they're aiming for. And compromising means I'm going to take longer to get there or maybe not get there at all. Sometimes that's what it means. So it can be worth exploring in that case what it is, what outcome you're going for, right? That there are fundamentally incompatible, like I want to accomplish this by doing this and it doesn't match up. But sometimes there are, right? Like I didn't play Dungeons and Dragons because I thought someday that would be useful to me in terms of constructing a Dungeons and Dragons therapy group. I did it because I liked it, but now that we're here, I can take all that information I have, which, man, I wish we had more time because I go into attention, because this is what we talk about, distraction or wandering attention. No, you're collecting information that maybe you integrate later on to come up with something new and creative or whatever. Maybe not. But how would we ever know? You might use it even after,
Exactly. This is, and just going with it, like picking your interest and pursuing it, because we don't know, there's multiple outcomes, right? So if you pick X, Y, or Z, something might happen, but if you pick A, B, or C, and there's just too many outcomes, like do what you love and keep pursuing it, go down the rabbit holes and enjoy the journey, if you're able.
We have a question. Has anyone told me that I look like Dave Grohl? And has anyone told you that you look like Zendaya? So there's that question. Yes, I have heard that before. I like hearing it though. Somebody responded to what you were saying, Lindsay, about integration is a really good compromise because then you don't go through the negative aspects that can come with completely neglecting a skill and dealing with the degradation that can come with that.
Yes, beautiful thought.
Yeah. I agree. Again, a specific like framework way to apply this like approach, and it's relevant to the parent-child stuff we were talking about earlier too, is I'm trying not, we got a minute left, so I got to skip a bunch of stuff that I would normally say. We don't know why you want what you want. I don't know why I want what I want. We have no way of, we can after the fact theorize about it, but we don't construct desire in that like conscious, intentional way, right? So I like to say shift the burden of proof to, instead of I should do what I'm supposed to do unless I can justify doing what I want to do, that instead it's I do what I want to do unless I have a reason not to. And that's not a rare exception. This doesn't mean everybody run around and do whatever you want all the time. At any given moment, there's a bunch of things that I want to do, but there's reason not to do those things. It's just about, you have to make it intentional to come off of your desire instead of make it intentional to get onto your desire. So you want to play D&D? Do it. Will be useful later. Who cares? Maybe, maybe not, but you want to do it.
Brandon, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. A weird thing to end on, to tell everybody to play D&D, but
It's beautiful. Yes.
yeah, no, this was fun. I really appreciate you being here.
Yes. Thank you for having me. It was very fun. Great conversation.
Yeah, and all of you in chat too. Thank you. Lots of good questions, lots of participation today. I appreciate it. And I will be here next week, and Lindsay's going to join us again in the future. But we have a date for that already, right? March something?
Oh, yes, we do have a date. That's right. March something.
Yeah.
That's right. It's on our
the
calendar.
second Wednesday of March, but we'll announce it as we get closer, and you might pop in randomly here and there.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So
thank you, guys.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you later. Bye.